The Crystal Lake Historical Society presents Lost Crystal Lake. This presentation will feature pictures and information about buildings and structures which no longer exist in Crystal Lake. Some were removed long before our time, yet pictures of more recent buildings and structures may bring back fond memories of these places from our past. Let's take a walk back through the years and see and learn about Lost Crystal Lake. The downtown area. Mom says, you should always greet your guests properly. This sign was erected in 1922 and was commonly referred to as the electric sign. The sign was placed near the train depot and was built to welcome visitors to Crystal Lake. In later years, the electrical part of the electric sign was removed and it became just a sign. Herbert A. Dodge coined the phrase, Crystal Lake, a good place to live. And here is a front and a back view of the electric sign. This photo was taken about 1960. The sign was removed in the early 1970s. This water tower was built in 1900. The water tower was 104 feet high and had a 65,000 gallon capacity. One of its primary functions was to provide plenty of water for the steam locomotives that stopped at the nearby train depot. This picture on the right shows the water tower's proximity to the old City Hall and fire station. The tower was removed in 1955. Besides water storage, the water tower afforded us some early aerial views of Crystal Lake. This picture was taken about 1910. The roads you see are Main Street and Gates Street. And where that sign is at the corner is approximately where the Crystal Lake Brewing is today. Railroad service to our community was first established in the mid-1850s. Since then, the railroads have played a vital role in the development of Crystal Lake. The current train depot was built in 1914. Prior to the 1914 building, this structure served as the depot. At one time, the railroad tracks ran on both sides of the depot, and this could explain why Woodstock Street was originally called South Railroad Street. And it looks like more than a few train cars were lost in this wreck. Fortunately, no lives were lost. The Crystal Lake Pickling and Preserving Works. This drawing is taken from the 1872 McHenry County Atlas. The Crystal Lake Pickling and Preserving Works was started in 1871. At first, it was very successful. 55,000 bushels of pickles were produced by the plant the first year. 200 men were employed by the factory. The business eventually failed, but was resurrected for a short while in later years. The site is currently part of the city's municipal complex. Charles C. Pingree opened his hotel in 1889. A 60-foot addition was added in 1923. The property was owned by the Pingree family until 1958. In its heyday, the hotel was beautiful and elegant. This picture was taken in the 1970s. It looks like it needs a paint job, but the flowering bushes look pretty nice. And this photo was taken a few years later, about 1980. The Pingree Hotel now has a decent coat of paint, but the hotel was definitely in a deteriorated condition, used primarily as a low-income boarding house. In the early 1990s, the hotel was demolished. The site is currently occupied by townhomes. Brudigan's blacksmith shop was located on Woodstock Street, just east of Grant Street, approximately where Kalk's Butcher Shop is located today. Henry Brudigan immigrated from Germany in 1882. Shortly thereafter, he settled in Crystal Lake and opened up his blacksmith shop. In 1910, his son William took over the family business. Henry Brudigan was a prominent citizen in our community. He served as a city alderman as well as township assessor. The Brudigan family was very active in Emmanuel Lutheran Church. In fact, Henry died while attending church one Sunday. Just east of Brudigan's was the former Bauer Garage building. This picture was taken around 1912, and the sign says H.J. Bauer and Sons Garage and Auto Livery. In 1914, H.J. Bauer removed the old building and built an Art Deco style building to house his garage, auto sales room, and repair shop. The cost to build was about $12,000, a princely sum in those days. The entire building was built of brick, iron, and cement, and was said to be as nearly fireproof as possible. The original wood hotel structure burned to the ground in 1900. In 1902, Mrs. E.H. Richmond rebuilt her hotel of brick and earned the reputation of the best hotel between Chicago and Janesville. In later years, it was known as the Blethen Hotel. The photo on the left is a 1930s view of the Blethen Hotel. The photo on the right shows the William Street front to the Blethen Hotel. The building on the right, the sign says Jensen's Bakery, is still in existence. Brown's Coffee Shop is relocating to this building. The Blethen Hotel building was demolished several years ago to make way for the redesign and straightening of Woodstock Street. Remember the Ace Hardware store on the west side of William Street? These photos were taken in the early 1980s. The building burned to the ground a few years later. But I have to admit, I don't mind that awful mansard facade burned down too. The current building at this location houses several businesses, including Reflections Hair Salon, Area 51 Tattoos, Marvin's Toy Store, Kitchen Outfitters, Where Did You Get That? And the Olive Tap. Colby Motor Sales was the first auto dealer in Crystal Lake and one of the first in the country. Old newspaper articles tell us that in 1905, Claude Colby and his son Fred began selling the famous Ford machines. In later years, they also sold Overland, Studebaker, and Chrysler products. This photo was taken in 1936 when the Colby building was decked out for the town's centennial celebration. Over the years, Colby Motor Sales occupied several different buildings on North Main Street. Perhaps these are more familiar to you. We're looking south on Main Street, just south of the railroad tracks. Both of these buildings are now gone and have been replaced with parking lots. Oak Industries was started in 1924 by Ed Bessie. Oak manufactured electronic components for various industries. This was just one of Oak's buildings. In addition to Oak Industries, Mr. Bessie was one of several founders of this Duntile factory. Founded in 1927, the Duntile factory produced a brick-like building material which was said to provide superior strength and beauty in the construction of buildings. And although the old Duntile factory is now gone, many beautiful structures in Crystal Lake remain that are built of this unique material. And here are two pictures, one of the Lorimer Mansion on Lake Avenue, right across from Main Beach, and one is the Bessie House on Country Club Road, both made of Duntile. The Alexander Lumber Company operated at this location until the early 1980s. Their current location is up near Ridgefield. Today, this site is occupied by a commuter parking lot, which is appropriately named the Alexander Commuter Lot. The Bauer Gas Station was built in 1923 at the corner of Brink Street and Grant Street. It was the first gasoline service station in Crystal Lake. Today, the building on that corner houses the law firm of Zank, Cohen Wright, and Saladin. In later years, the station was owned by Jim Thormalen and Darwin Red Spangard and was known as the J&R Service Station. Some of you may remember when Hank Ibish became part owner of that station too. Notice the building in the back on the right? That was the old Jewel grocery store. In 1955, the Jewel moved across Brink Street where today's Brink Street Market is located. A couple of other things in these photos that are now lost include the old gravity-fed gas pumps in the top picture and the cool car down below. The White House. Kitty corner to the gas station stood the White House, which was built in the 1890s. James White and his father George owned a feed, flour, and coal business called White and Company. The business was located just a block away from the house near the railroad depot. Grant Street was once filled with houses, which eventually transitioned to businesses. Some may remember when Full Circle Records, the house, which was an apparel store, and Jewelry Chez Fay were here. The White House was demolished in 2006 and was replaced with a parking lot. Jewel Food Store. In 1955, the Jewel Tea Food Store was erected at the corner of Brink Street and William Street. The store was 80 feet wide and 140 feet deep. At the time, it was the largest food store in McHenry County, boasting over 100,000 items in the store. Eventually, Jewel moved out of downtown to Route 14. At first, it was located in the Country Corners Shopping Center. There's a dollar store, Vietnamese restaurant, and Petco there today. 2 moves later, Jewel is still on Route 14, and it's still one of the largest grocery stores in Crystal Lake. And the old Jewel store building? Its roof collapsed after a snowstorm, and the building was then bulldozed to the ground. The next few slides show buildings in Crystal Lake which are still standing. Although the building itself is not lost, the original facade is certainly gone, or at least out of sight. This photo of the Citizen State Bank building was taken around 1910. In 1916, the Citizen State Bank and State Bank of Crystal Lake were merged to form the United State Bank. The glazed terracotta columned facade was added around 1927. The United State Bank failed in 1931 due to a quiet run of withdrawals, which resulted from rumors regarding the financial difficulties of the bank president, Walter Hoy Wilbur. Shortly after the bank shut down, Lynn Richards, head cashier, was found dead, a suspected suicide, and Walter Hoy Wilbur declared bankruptcy. The building was purchased by Home State Bank around 1940 and remained their headquarters for 20 years. Today, it is home to Moretti's Pizza and Pub. Recognize this place? Built in 1892, the original owner was Ora C. Colby, who ran a mercantile store. However, it is best known for its second owner, Morris Cohn. Morris Cohn was a Jewish Russian immigrant. When he came to this country, he was quite poor. In later years, he worked his way up to owning many of the downtown buildings. Cohn operated a department store at this downtown location. He was one of the earliest retailers to purchase in large quantity at a lower price and pass on those savings to his customers. He maintained a large inventory of clothing, shoes, and housewares. Cohn's store closed in the 1950s. Same building, about 1990, the mansard facade was added in the 1970s. Same building again. This newest facade was added in 1998 by Crystal Lake Bank and Trust. The Cohn Commercial Building was built in 1929 and was home to the telephone company and a drugstore. The mansard front was put on in the 1970s. Unfortunately, the mansard hides the natural beauty of this building. Both of these buildings were built in 1912. They almost look like twins. The building on the left was owned by Ben Rao for many years. It was here that Mr. Rao operated his hardware store. The building on the right was originally known as the Crystal Theater. Silent movies would be shown while a piano near the stage provided musical background. Competition forced the Crystal Theater to close its doors in 1917. In the early 1920s, the building was owned by William Metropolis, who operated the Crystal Pocket Billiards and Bowling Alley. Mr. Metropolis later moved his business around the corner to Brink Street and opened the Metro Bowl. Today, the old Rao Hardware building on the left looks pretty much the same. The false front of the Prickett and Payne building was put on in the 1990s. It really changed the look. Wickham Interiors purchased the building in 2000 and has recently sold it. Leroy and Louise Stanek opened this flower shop in 1950. Located at the corner of William Street and Crystal Lake Avenue, it was known as the Art Floral Shop. The Staneks operated the flower shop for 33 years at this location. Schaefer Builders purchased the building and completely updated the building's facade. Most locals agree the update was a beautiful transformation. The building is currently owned by Tyler Lukey, Keller Williams Real Estate. But this is the front of the Art Floral Shop that I miss. The Staneks would always have a huge display of flowers set up on the front lawn. If someone wanted to buy some plants after the shop was closed for the day, they would pick out what they wanted, record it on a piece of paper, and put the paper in the shop's mailbox. They would then stop by to pay when the shop was open for business. And commercial buildings aren't the only ones that can lose their facade. This photo shows the Colby House, built in 1886. It is still standing at the northeast corner of Brink and Minnie Streets. But see how it looks today. The lovely turret and porch no longer grace the front corner. The house originally had 12 rooms and was one of the finest homes in town. A winding stairway led to the second and third floors. Much of the interior woodwork has been retained. Here's another example of a lost facade on a residential structure. Imagine the surprise on the current owner's face when he saw this 1939 vintage photo, because this is what their house looks like today. Quite a difference. Lost Crystal Lake churches. This beautiful structure proudly stood on the corner of William Street and Brink Street from 1873 to 1954. It was the Methodist Episcopal Church, commonly known as the M&E Church. The picture on the right shows the M&E Church on William Street looking south from Brink Street. It looks a bit different today with the Rao Memorial Clock, Benedict's La Strada, and the Brink Street Market. The church was torn down in 1954 when the congregation moved to their current location at Dole and Crystal Lake Avenue. This photo of Bethany Lutheran Church was taken around 1955. The building was built in 1925 by the newly formed congregation of Bethany Lutheran Church. The total actual cost of this building was $24,000. To reduce costs, the members dug the foundation for the building by hand. And by the mid-1950s, the congregation had started to outgrow its original facility. An education wing was completed in 1958. The photo on the right shows this mismatched addition. As a result of the congregation's continuing growth and need for additional space, the old church building was torn down and a new brick structure was built in 1978. The Swedish Mission Church was built in 1893. It was located in an area of Crystal Lake known as Swedenburg. Many Swedish immigrants lived in the vicinity. Services were originally in Swedish. Måns Peterson donated the land for the church. His house is one of those in the top picture, which would be at the corner of Crystal Lake Avenue and Dole, where the First United Methodist Church now stands. The lower photo gives us a rear view of the church's interior. It looks like the church was decorated for Christmas. Several additions were added on to the original building. The old Swedish Evangelical Mission Church building was torn down in 1960 and replaced with a new building. Many years later, the Evangelical Free Church of Crystal Lake moved further east on Crystal Lake Avenue. The Salvation Army now operates a church community center at this location. This view is McHenry Avenue in 1901. The white building in the foreground is the Free Methodist Church, which was built in the 1860s. The congregation worshiped at this McHenry Avenue site until 1898, when they moved to Crystal Lake Avenue. The Free Methodist congregation was unable to sustain itself, and by 1922, it had only 5 members. The building with the tall steeple is the Baptist Church. The Baptists were one of the earliest congregations to organize in Crystal Lake. Their earliest house of worship was used by all denominations. The church building shown was built in 1864 at a cost of $2,300. The congregation flourished for a while, but by 1922 was totally inactive. The original Baptist congregation is not affiliated with any of the Baptist congregations in Crystal Lake today. Lost Crystal Lake schools. The Union School was built in 1883. This is a front and side view of the Union School, which was a 2-story Italianate brick building. There were 6 classrooms in the school, educating students from first grade through high school. When the school was built, it was intended for an enrollment of 240 students. By 1900, it was bursting at the seams, and the need for another school was apparent. Just east of the Union School building was a second building, which was built in 1906. This building served as the town high school until 1922, when the present Crystal Lake Central High School was built. An underground tunnel connected these two buildings. The original Union School building was torn down in 1948. The old high school building was torn down in 1978. At that time, the Central Elementary School was built on the site. And in 1985, it was renamed Hussman Elementary School in honor of John Hussman, who had been its principal for many years. Lost Crystal Lake houses. The Josiah Walkup House. This home was built in 1846 by Josiah Walkup. Josiah served as a trainman for the Northwestern Railroad during the mid-1800s. For many years, the terminus of that line was at Walkup's Crossing on his property. The house was demolished in 1997. The Franklin E. Cox House. This house was built in 1904 by Franklin E. Cox as a wedding gift to his new young bride. Unfortunately, Mrs. Cox died a year later and the house was sold. This photo was taken around 1910 when it was owned by the Wiltberger family. Now, some of you may remember this structure as the Dean House. A former school superintendent, H.A. Dean, and his family lived here for many years. The house was demolished many years ago, and today 2 new homes have been built on the site. The Lowell House. This beautiful Queen Anne house was built in 1902 by attorney Lorenzo D. Lowell. The house was painted light yellow with dark green trim at the top. The home had leaded and stained glass windows, crystal chandeliers, a green marble fireplace, and marble countertops in the bathrooms. According to family history, Lorenzo Lowell had heard that if lake sand was used in the plaster would not crack. He did this with sand from Crystal Lake, and when the family sold the home in 1959, there were no cracks in the plaster. Unfortunately, not everyone appreciated the beauty of the Lowell House. Consequently, it was demolished in 1970. The Wagoner Law Firm now occupies the site. This picture was taken about 1906. The photo is found in the Nunde and Crystal Lake Illustrated Prospectus, a publication created to sing the praises of the villages of Nunde and Crystal Lake. Charles Techler was a successful real estate tycoon in the early days of Crystal Lake. This house was located at the southeast corner of Crystal Lake Avenue and Walkup Avenue, right where the Crystal Lake Park District administrative offices are today. The Andrew Simons House. In 1861, local stonemason Andrew Jackson Simons purchased 1 acre of land for $100. He purchased bricks and materials to build a home for himself and his new bride, Charlotte Chittenden. The Civil War disrupted the young couple's plans, and Andrew went to war. 4 years later, when he returned to Crystal Lake, he discovered his home building bricks had been stolen. And so this famous stonemason was forced to build a wood frame house for his own family. Andrew Simons is credited with building several cobblestone and brick houses in Crystal Lake, including the Walkup House, Wallace House, Colonel Palmer House, and many more. And here's how the Simons house looked in 1914. You can see it peeking out from the trees. It's interesting to see the road we all know today as Route 14. After years of neglect, the house was torn down in 2005. Anson Thompson came to Crystal Lake in 1841. The east section of this house is Italianate and predates 1872. Thompson owned a 160-acre farm. The house was remodeled several times and eventually was torn down in 1988. The site is now occupied by the Virginia Park office complex. The Dietrich House. This brick home stood proudly on McHenry Avenue for many years. It was home to many families, including the Hayes family. At one time, the Hayes family had a polo field and even an in-ground swimming pool. In later years, it was owned by Profile Publications. The house was demolished in 2004. I took this photo on the evening the house was demolished. At that time, all that was left standing was the living room fireplace. An assisted living nursing home care facility is now on the property. Lost Crystal Lake on Route 14. The Pure Oil Company. The Pure Oil building was located near where the current Hobby Lobby and Jewel Food Store stands. Beginning in the late 1960s, the first classes of the McHenry County College were also held at this location. The building was later used by the Illinois Institute of Technology. This photo is from the collection of local resident Bill Baker. It shows you where the Crystal Lake Plaza is. Mr. Baker was one of the developers of the plaza, and it also points out where the Pure Oil building once stood. The Crystal Drive-In Theater. July 16th, 1953 was opening day for the Crystal Drive-In Theater. Located in the heart of today's Manor subdivision, the drive-in had room for 750 cars. A cafeteria facility known as the Autodine was constructed on site to provide refreshments. I'm sure many of you have fond teenage memories of going to the drive-in. The drive-in eventually closed down and the property remained vacant for at least 2 decades. The only thing left standing were a couple of the old movie screens. This photo was taken in March 2005. It is the last photograph of the old drive-in movie screen before it was hauled away. The site is now occupied by townhomes. The Manor Motel was built in 1955. 2 years after the Crystal Drive-In Theater. The motel was located at the corner of Route 14 and Manor Road. When it was first built, it was a nice place to stay. My own memories of the building prior to demolition were of a deteriorated, rundown facility. Today, the corner is occupied by a shopping center. And located near the intersection of Route 14 and 31, the Twin Ponds Golf Course offered 9 holes of par 3 golf. In the mid-1990s, the golf course was sold to a developer who bulldozed the course to create today's shopping center with Home Depot and Office Depot. Not only did Crystal Lake lose this gem of a golf course, but it lost many acres of green space. And my husband also notes that the prices shown here have also been lost. Martinetti's Restaurant and Motel. The original Martinetti's is shown on the left. A disastrous fire in 1954 forced Frank and Lou Martinetti to construct the brick building on the right. The restaurant was later known as TC Spirits, September's, and Coleman's Place. The restaurant and motel buildings were torn down in 1996 and is now home to a car dealership. This popular restaurant and banquet facility stood at the corner of Virginia Street and Virginia Road. For many years, it was known as the Crystal Lodge, the Checo Lodge, Fritzl's, and then later as the John Evans Inn. This was also the meeting place for numerous clubs and organizations. The building was torn down several years ago and was replaced by a Walgreens pharmacy. Bueller's House and Store. This photo was taken in 1906. John Bueller operated a general store. The house, shown on the left, was moved and still stands at the southwest corner of McHenry Avenue and Oriole Trail. In 1965, National Tea built a food store here. Today, the site is occupied by Goodyear Tire and Auto. The bandstand. As early as 1893, a bandstand was situated in McCormick Park. For many years, the city band performed at this location, entertaining local citizens. The bandstand was removed in the late 1940s to make way for today's lovely water tower. And if you look at the picture on the right, the stone structure on the left side of that picture is now part of today's Chamber of Commerce building. Pearson's Block Building. This photo is of Virginia Street, also known as Route 14, just east of today's Dole Avenue. The three-story building on the right was built in 1858 by James Pearson. It stood at the corner of Virginia Street and Florence. The Pearson Brick Block Building had a dance hall, stores, and a post office. For many years, a room in the building was used to hold the monthly meetings of the Village Council of Crystal Lake. In later years, the building was owned by Walter Fitch. In 1924, the vacant and neglected building was torn down. In its place, a gasoline station was erected, and today the corner is home to a mobile gas station and car wash. And as a side note, Pearson Street is named after our friend James Pearson. James Pearson's house was one of 3 cobblestone homes built by local stonemason Andrew Jackson Simons. The house was on Virginia Street, a little bit west of Dole Avenue. Sometime prior to 1910, a large addition was added to the back of the original structure. The Pearson house was torn down in 1960, and a single-story brick telephone building occupies the site. There are 2 remaining cobblestone houses left in Crystal Lake, the John B. Walkup House and the Columbus Wallace House. Both are protected with landmark designation, and I hope I will never have to include them in this slide presentation called Lost Crystal Lake. The first hotel in Crystal Lake was the King Hotel. It was located across from the city park on Virginia Street, about where the Taco Bell stands today. Lyman King's Hotel was first built with logs. Later, the interior was embellished with walnut beams and plastered walls. The King Hotel was a favorite stopover for stagecoaches and fur traders. Lyman King died in 1851. After that, the hotel changed hands several times, but by the early 1870s was owned by Thomas H. Ashton. Mr. Ashton enlarged the hotel by adding on several additions. The Ashton House Hotel was known as the grandfather of all hotels, and was one of the largest and most elegant buildings in the vicinity. Sadly, on November 13th, 1904, the Ashton House Hotel was completely destroyed by fire, never to be rebuilt. Lost Crystal Lake on the lakefront. The main beach building we use today was built in 1926. Prior to that, residents of Crystal Lake used the shelters shown above as their beach and picnic building. The water slide was purchased in 1931 from Loudon Playground Equipment Company for $1,220. In 1950, the slide was condemned and dismantled. Tour boats. Now here's something that's lost from Crystal Lake. It's tour boats on the lake. Back in 1939, you could take a guided tour around the lake for 25 cents. I say, bring back the tour boats and I'll volunteer to be the first tour guide. Doesn't that sound like fun? The Lakeshore House was built in 1900 by W.E. Prickett and Sons for $5,000. This large resort could accommodate 60 guests. Roomy balconies and verandas overlooked the lake. In later years, it became more of a rooming house. The house was destroyed by fire in 1982. This beautiful home was built in the 1890s by Dr. Henry Byford, a Chicago physician who enjoyed spending his summers at Crystal Lake. In 1908, the 25-room mansion and 8 acres of land was sold for $18,000 to Patrick Leonard, with the intent to turn it into a beautiful lakefront resort. The hotel was quite large and could accommodate up to 80 guests during the week and up to 130 guests on the weekend. The Leonard Hotel was perhaps the most prestigious of all the resort hotels in Crystal Lake. Just 1 year after opening, 3 annexes were built to accommodate an increased demand for rooms. The Leonard Hotel enjoyed a fine reputation for less than a decade. In November 1917, fire struck the beautiful Byford Mansion and the building was destroyed beyond repair. Built about 1890, this lakeside palace was the summer home of millionaire shoe manufacturer J.H. Sells. At one time, Mr. Sells owned 39 acres of the surrounding land and operated a small farm on his property. The home was demolished in 1999, and the current house on the site is built as a replica of George Washington's Mount Vernon. The Crystal Vista subdivision, located on the west end of the lake, was developed by R.A. Cepak. The Crystal Vista Clubhouse was built during the 1920s. Dances and various social functions were held at this clubhouse. The clubhouse closed during the Depression. Vandals ransacked and destroyed the abandoned structure. By 1940, the remains of the building were removed from the site. The first commercial ice businesses in Crystal Lake was started by Amos Page in 1856. By 1873, Charles Dole and his brother James Dole got possession of the lake. They built and filled 6 ice houses. This number increased to 12 just a few years later. Ice was harvested from the lake and stored year-round in these warehouses. By 1891, about 100,000 tons of ice were stored in Dole's ice houses. The ice from Crystal Lake was in great demand, for the water was as clear as crystal. The last of these large ice houses burned down in 1914. And in the lower right picture, you can see them looking from across the lake to the south shore, and you can see those large ice houses in between the tree lines. Lost Crystal Lake. The school district has taught us there's a lesson to be learned. This English Tudor brick and stone pump house was built in 1930 by contractor Oscar Strom. In 1996, School District 47 demolished the structure amidst great controversy. The lesson learned is we must pay attention to, care for, and protect the buildings of our past. Historic buildings serve as a gentle reminder of our past. And as the great poet Carl Sandburg said, if we have no regard for our past, we will have little future worth remembering. We've seen pictures and heard stories of structures which no longer exist in our community, but there are many more historic buildings that are being preserved through the efforts of individuals, businesses, and organizations. So let's celebrate our community's rich heritage and continue to work together to prevent future unnecessary additions to this program, Lost Crystal Lake.